Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. If you don't know me, I am Camille Breward, and I'm the Senior Marketing Executive from myHR Toolkit. And of course, I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar. So for those of you who are new to us, although I do see there are a few of our customers on today, myHR Toolkit provides HR software specifically for small and medium-sized businesses. And we have a range of HR and employment law resources available for businesses online, including this ongoing series of webinars. So today we're going to have a look at how staff absence is impacting businesses in 2022. It's quite a hot topic at the moment. So we'll be looking at the ways in which staff absence has been impacting small businesses post-pandemic, some common staff absence issues and how your business can tackle them, and some strategies for managing and reducing staff absence in 2022. So there'll be a presentation of about 30 minutes, and after that we'll have time to answer your questions in the Q&A. And just to point out that on the Zoom menu there is a Q&A box. You can add questions to this. Feel free to go as we go, add questions to it, or during the Q&A. And also there is the chat as well, so do feel free to get involved in the chat and say hello. But if you do have a question that you really want answered in the Q&A, make sure to ask it in the Q&A area instead. Today's session is offering general and not specific legal advice, and we do have a handy variety of resources for SMEs, including, sort of relevant to today, an absence management guide for SMEs, where you can learn ways to anticipate and manage absence to lessen its impact. So if a guide is of interest to anyone on today, I'm just going to pop in a link to a guide we've created in the chat, so you can have that for your records. Brill. So without further ado, here this morning to talk to us about the impact of staff absence in 2022 is Alison Purcell from Amica HR. We did originally have Beth Franklin from Amica scheduled for this webinar, but unfortunately she has taken ill. So Alison has very kindly stepped in to deliver the webinar this morning. Alison started her HR career back in 2009 in a large charity based in Lincolnshire, and she worked her way through the CIPD qualifications to complete her CIPD level 7 and also a postgraduate diploma in human resource management. And she now works for Amica as their HR manager, managing the HR operations team, leading on process improvement projects and assisting with generalist HR matters from absence management and recruitment to employee relations cases, for example. So Alison, good morning. Really great to have you here with us today.
Good morning, everyone.
All right, should we do a slide share handover?
Yes.
Yeah. Awesome. So hopefully if you choose to share, that should come up.
Sorry, I'm just having technical difficulties.
All okay?
Right. Are we sharing yet?
Yeah, that's coming up.
Can you see the first slide?
Yes, I can see the slideshow. It's in edit mode at the moment, but maybe it's just taking a little time to show the slideshow.
Right. If I just, it's obviously sharing the wrong screen at the moment.
Yeah, no worries.
Is that better?
Perfect. Brilliant.
Right. So you can see the
right.
first slide and no notes. That's what we need.
Fantastic. I will let you crack on.
Right.
Alison.
So the aim of today is to talk you through the ways in which staff absence has been impacting small businesses post-pandemic, some common staff absences and how you can tackle them, and then strategies for managing and reducing staff absence in 2022. So, you know, the reason you're here is absence is a considerable cost for many businesses, and it obviously has implications for productivity, and therefore, you know, managing it has to be a key activity within your organisation, especially within the small business when you've got limited resources. The issues that it causes are not only financial, there's a loss of productivity, disruption to the workplace, that has impact on colleagues, morale. So it's obviously something that you do need to tackle as soon as it starts to become an issue. It can be short-term absence, just 1 or 2 days here and there, or it can be a long-term absence, which would be something over a period of 4 weeks. So it's obviously really important to manage it. Now, pre-pandemic, the trend in absence rates was it was generally declining. It declined through the 2000s, as you can see from the graph, and it remained relatively low and flat throughout the 2010s, where it actually dropped to a record low pre and during pandemic. So lockdown started in March 2020, and then following that in 2021, the rate increased to the highest it had ever been since 2010. Now, people have put this down to the main factor is obviously the rates dropped because everybody was on furlough. So therefore, if you're on furlough, you're not actually on sick leave. And the increase is due to people returning and after COVID, which is as you would expect during a pandemic. However, we have seen a mixture of trends following this. So just a quick poll, since everyone's returned to the new normal, what have you seen within your organisation? Have your absence rates increased or decreased?
Okay, so I'm just going to launch that poll now. So this should be coming up on your screens. It's all anonymous. So if you'd like to vote on sort of the absence rates you've seen post-pandemic, I'll just give people a little time to answer that. Okay, so I'm just going to share the results of that with everyone.
So it's actually quite interesting that some of you have seen no change. So obviously working at Amica, we work with a large range of clients across all sectors, and we have seen the same thing really. So some people have seen an increase, some have seen a decrease, and some have seen no change. But whatever that is, obviously it have an impact on your organisation. So if you've seen a decrease, I mean, the obvious thing to say is, you know, we've seen a decrease in absence. That's a good thing, isn't it? You know, that's kind of what we're aiming for. So, you know, if that's what you've been working towards, you've put well-being measures in place, and, you know, decrease is a result of that, then great, that's working. But are you seeing your absence rates decrease, but you're still having productivity issues? It could be that your records are not correct. It could be that people are not reporting absences. So this is something that we have seen post-pandemic with the whole work from home situation. Whereas before, people would have a day off work because, you know, they were too ill for the commute, or they didn't, you know, they didn't think they could make it into work. It's so much easier to stay at home and half work than pre-work from home times, where you would have had to drag yourself into the office. People would have been more likely to be absent, whereas now they're more likely to either attempt work but not be as productive, or just not report the absence and not work. So what would have been presenteeism before is now, well, the same. It's still presenteeism, but you're actually not aware that they're attending work ill. So this can lead to a loss of productivity. If you've seen an increase, you know why? National data did put this down to COVID, people returning from furlough. And the initial concern that we had working in HR was that long COVID was potentially going to be an issue. And that's what we'd planned that we were going to be dealing with moving forward. We have actually only dealt with 1 or 2 cases of this, and it was the height of the pandemic. So that isn't the absence reasons that we've seen. What are the absence reasons? So the most common absence issues are obviously minor illnesses. So these are your short-term absences that you see most likely: the cough, the cold, the flu, the sickness bugs. And it's short-term absence, but it can be particularly disruptive depending on your organisation. You can't eradicate it completely, but later on in the presentation, we'll talk about how you can monitor it and how you can try and reduce it. The next situation is usually musculoskeletal issues. So these are your injuries, your bad back, usually seen in manual jobs, and they do usually result in long-term or reoccurring absences. The next category, which we are seeing as more and more prevalent following the pandemic, is mental health issues. This has become more problematic and is the main cause. We've seen a huge increase with lots of people suffering. There are potentially many reasons for this, but the work from home and also the isolation do seem to be a factor. Things like the teams aren't as connected, managers don't always spot the early warning signs, people don't feel comfortable within the teams to talk as much. So I thought we'd do another quick poll of what do you see, what are the most common absence reasons within your organisation out of those categories?
Just going to launch this second poll, again, anonymous poll. I'll just give people a little bit of time to answer. Okay, so I'll just share the results of that with everyone.
That's great. So as the results are minor illness, that isn't surprising, and that isn't something that you can eradicate completely. However, with careful recording and careful monitoring, it is something that you can reduce. So moving on from that, they're the obvious absence issues, but what issues have we seen post-pandemic that weren't issues before and that can contribute to your absence problems? So the main one, as I'm sure people have encountered, is GP not having appointments. This is, obviously a problem for people getting sick notes. It means that they're not getting treated when they need to be treated, and this can prolong the absence. It also means a delay in referrals. So if you've got an employee that does have a mental health issue, it's a delay in counselling, so they're not getting the support they need, which prolongs the absence. If it's a musculoskeletal issue, it's a delay in the referral for physio. We're currently seeing waits of about 2 months for a physio appointment. And for counselling even longer. It's also, those minor illnesses that people are having a couple of days off that could be a reoccurring problem for them. It's taking longer and longer to sort those out. So these are all making your absence issues worse. The other thing that we're also seeing is GPs are no longer producing reports for capability procedures. So in the past, where we would rely on a GP to either confirm somebody's illness or confirm for us their fitness for work, the GPs have now decided that that isn't something that they're going to help with anymore, which then leaves our situation. Where do we go now? If you've got a capability procedure and you can only make a determination on whether to terminate or what reasonable adjustments to make based on a medical opinion, and a GP is not providing one, you do have to find other ways to go around this. So the next step would be to go to an occupational health provider. And obviously this is now leading to the next problem, which is occupational health providers are dealing with such high volumes of management referrals and ongoing long-term sickness, reasonable adjustments and everything else we ask them to do, that we're struggling to get appointments. Appointments can now take a few weeks to come through. So all of these problems that we're seeing that are directly related to the pandemic are having an impact on absence, the length of absence and also the reoccurring absences. So that's what we're currently experiencing. We are predicting that due to the work from home and people having the option to work from the kitchen table, we're expecting that we're going to start seeing physical impacts and also mental impacts from that moving forward. One thing we would highly advise is that you start doing your workstation checklists now. If you didn't do them before, obviously before everybody went to work from home, it was an emergency situation and everybody just set up. But we are now seeing cases of people with back issues creeping in because their desks aren't set up correctly, people with repetitive strain injuries because their table's at the wrong height. So it is something to be mindful of, and obviously the mental health issue of working from home and seeing that isolation. Has anyone experienced any other issues that they found that are particularly a problem post-pandemic that they would like to have answered or have some discussion around? If you've seen any or have any, just pop it in the questions and answers and we can talk about it when we get through to the end. So we've talked about what the absence issues are and what the problems that we've encountered. So obviously the next question is, how do we go about managing it and how do we go about changing it? So the first thing is pretty standard, but in a small organisation, it's not always the first thing people think about. Having a robust absence procedure and one that you follow is the key to managing and reducing these absences. If everybody knows what's expected for them, when the trigger points are, and that things are going to be dealt with, this does go a long way to actually helping reduce that absence. So if you're from quite a small organisation that's always relied on goodwill, but people have now started to increase their absence, it might be time to increase those controls around absence and put a policy in place. Not that, obviously I'm saying everybody does this, but it just leaves no room for slacking. If people have, previously got away with, oh, I'm just not feeling well, I'm not going to bother coming in, and there's no repercussions, it could be that then becomes commonplace. So if you've got a good, robust procedure in place, everybody knows how to report it, then that should be the first step and give you a good, solid foundation in which to manage your absences. Once you've got that in place, being consistent with reporting is key. People working from home, not reporting the absence as an absence, people putting it down as holiday. If you're not consistent with the absence reporting, if you're not putting it onto either a spreadsheet or a HR system like myhrtoolkit, it makes it really hard to monitor, which we'll come to later. And so making sure that everything is reported consistently and fairly is really important. And obviously, as well as reporting, that's where the absence and recording comes in. So making sure that the absence is correctly reported. Is it the correct reason? Have they told you the actual reason? Have they just put illness? Because obviously, if someone's just put something vague as their absence reason, it makes it really hard to monitor evidence. Are the dates correct? Were they actually off for 2.5 days and it's only down for 2 days? All of these things are quite important when it comes to monitoring trigger points. So once you've got the procedure, you're consistent with your reporting and all absences are correct, it's really important that you then monitor what the information is you're finding. Again, this is where, looking at your data across the whole organisation and individuals is really helpful. So have you got a short-term absence issue in one department? Are all of the absences the same? An example that I've had within an organisation was an office where everybody in one department seemed to be constantly off with headaches, migraines, and when they looked into it, it was actually they were in an office with low lighting, they had artificial lighting, and because they'd identified that actually this key group of people all had the same absence, they were able to change it and reduce the absence. And so that's why monitoring is really important. You can see not only trends as a group and help to reduce it, but also trends from an individual. Does an individual always have a Friday afternoon off because they want to start the weekend early? Does an individual always have a Sunday night heavy drinking session and have a Monday morning off? Is there some reason why an employee always has a Wednesday afternoon off? By identifying those trigger points and then moving on to the next step, which is back to work interviews, we can help to pick out those finer details of that individual and put things in place to help and support them. So it could be that the person that tends to have a Thursday morning off has caring responsibilities on a Wednesday night, and that leaves them late coming into work. It could be that there are some reasonable adjustments to be made. It could be that it's a misconduct issue, but it could also be that there are some kind of reasonable adjustments that you can make, and the only way to do that is by making sure you're monitoring it and doing back to work interviews when people return. Not only acts as a deterrent for persistent short-term absence that isn't genuine, but they also can be a really good tool and help you provide evidence to moving on to the next stage, which is the capability procedure. So when managing and trying to reduce absence, knowing when to escalate to the capability procedure is really important. If somebody's off for a period of more than 4 weeks, it's important that you start doing things like well-being meetings, and having that evidence in place. So if you need to go down the route of, are they capable for the role, and what reasonable adjustments could I possibly make in order to make them capable of the role, this is where the capability procedure comes in. So it could be that you've got somebody on long-term absence because they've got a musculoskeletal issue, they've got a bad back, and they can't sit in the office for long periods of time, or they've got an injury and it means they can't do stairs, so they've been not coming to work. If you can make reasonable adjustments, you could have them returning to the workplace, which then obviously increases your productivity and lowers your absence rates. If you are having issues with somebody with mental health and you could get an occupational health report, you can follow the capability procedure and potentially adjust their role to something that would be more suitable. So you've still got a productive employee and their needs are also being met. Really quite important when it comes to neurodiversity and autism, ADHD and conditions like that, that we're now seeing more and more of in the workplace, where previously these things would have been hidden or people would have just been deemed as not capable for the job. With reasonable adjustments, we can actually make the environment a safe and supportive place for everybody to be productive in an equal manner. So that's where the Equality Act comes in. Obviously, when we are monitoring absence, we do have to be mindful of the Equality Act and what is a disability. So a disability under the Equality Act would be something that has or is going to impact the quality of life and the normal way of life for an individual for either the past 12 months or the potential for 12 months or more. So, this is why we have to be particularly careful with mental health issues or anything that is a long-term medical issue, because it could be classed as a disability. So we do have to be mindful not to discriminate. If somebody is coming to you, and they've got a lot of short-term absence, it's really important that you do those back to work interviews, because that could be masking a potential disability that you're unaware of. So these are all ways in which we can help to reduce those absences. So that's kind of everything I wanted to talk to you about today with regard to managing absence. Does anyone have any questions or anything?
Thanks so much, Alison. That was really great. Yeah, very thorough look at the whole issue, basically, and sort of what businesses are facing now in terms of absence post-pandemic. Yeah, if anyone has a question for Alison, do feel free to add that in the Q&A. We've got a couple of things coming in already. I'll start things off with a question from me, actually, because I know that you mentioned presenteeism earlier as possibly the reason why there could be a so-called decrease in absence, particularly among sort of the remote workforce. And do you have any kind of tips or ideas on how you can kind of detect and maybe tackle presenteeism in staff?
Yeah, so this is all about good management when people are working from home, making sure that, they're team leaders, managers, or just teamwork, that actually, are you making sure that when they're saying they're logged in, they are actually logged in? Are you keeping in contact with your team throughout the day? Do you have set targets? I don't want, not down the route of micromanagement, but it's really about that engagement and that connection, knowing your team. It is a lot harder when the teams have been set up remotely. People aren't as engaged, they're not as connected, they're not as loyal as they once were. So it is a challenge that we have to overcome, but building that relationship with your team, building that trust and honesty and that openness. So, I know when I let my team work from home, right, they've got a call at 3. I know what they're doing during the day. It's not about micromanaging. It's just you have to keep a firmer control. And if you can see that somebody's productivity is slowing down, jumping on it quickly, helping work through that rather than letting it get to the point where it's actually a conduct issue. Hope that answered it.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. And we do have a question that's come in on chat from Sharon, who asks if it's okay to move from a discretionary or SSP policy to a company sickness policy where people are paid 5 days per year and then move on to SSP. So in the past, everyone's been paid fully, so reducing it to 5 days and sticking to SSP may raise questions. So how would you suggest rolling this out? So kind of shifting more towards SSP than company sick pay, it seems.
So if the current contractual clauses state that they get company sick pay for so many months and then move on to SSP, the only way you would be able to change that would be through consultation, and you'd have to have a business reason to do it. So you can't just change somebody's terms and conditions without good reason and without their agreement. So what we would advise in that situation would be to obviously take some kind of legal or HR advice and to consult with your employees, make the case as to why it's necessary, because I understand times have changed. As businesses grow, what you could previously afford is now not always affordable. So where if you'd have had 10 employees with a very low absence rate, you could afford to pay a high rate of company sick pay. If you've got the figures to demonstrate that actually that's no longer justifiable, you can go down the route of consultation. If people don't agree and you feel you do have the justification to do so, you can fire and rehire. But this is where it gets a bit sticky. So you can't just change the terms and conditions without consultation, without their agreement. But it can be done if it's justifiable.
Brilliant. Thanks for that, Alison, and thank you for your question, Sharon. We do have another question that's come in from Joanne, who asks about managers. She says that our managers are reluctant to record absence properly and consistently, despite telling them how important it is. How can I influence them to change their mindset on this? This is an historic issue, and being new to the organisation, I'm trying to change the mindset of managers as their teams grow and the business grows, or we'll have a much larger issue as you go forward. So would you have any tips for that?
The way to get through to, it's not always easy to get through to managers. We do appreciate, because obviously if they start to manage the issue, then it potentially causes them problems and they feel that it could make them lose staff that they feel are valuable. It's about justifying to them why it's important and explaining in real terms that's a situation that's relevant to them. So, for example, if you explain to a manager, if you let this fly for one person, this could escalate. Or if you don't manage this now, and then in 6 months it becomes a major issue, we don't have the evidence that we would need to start the disciplinary process. So it's about justifying to them that early stage of management is actually important. What we usually see is managers coming to us saying, oh, and this person's been a problem for 6 months now. And I say, well, actually, I've not got any record of that. So we have to start the monitoring process from then. So if you explain to them that long term, what seems like a short term, what seems like pain now is actually a short term pain compared to what they will have to do if they don't manage it. Unfortunately, managers don't always see it until it's needed. But if you can try and justify and explain with real life situations what's happened in other departments or other areas in the organisation, then hopefully you'll be able to get through to them just by true justification and examples of what can happen.
Yeah, that cultural change can be a bit of a slog sometimes,
Yes.
but yeah, definitely worth doing. Yeah, thanks so much for your question, Joanne, and thanks for that answer as well, Alison. If anyone else wants to ask another question, do feel free. I've got one from me, another one actually, that I thought of during the presentation. You sort of mentioned the mental health impacts of remote work and kind of the isolation aspect. Do you have any tips on how organisations could kind of address some of the potential mental health issues in their remote workers?
Yeah, so what, we keep mentioning connections over and over again, but it really is about that connection with your team, building the relationships, trying to do something fun and a little bit out there. So I know everybody was kind of Zoom quizzed out during the pandemic, but things like setting up regular catch-ups, so either a phone conversation, or people have set up things like virtual water coolers, or actually trying to make time for team building events in person where possible. And encouraging collaborative working on projects and things like that. So people do start to feel connected and invested to the team, because when you're working alone and in isolation, it's quite hard to see the impact that you have on others. And obviously that kind of relationship is what we use day to day to get by. So, I'm going to try my hardest today, because if I don't, I'm going to let Camille down. And it's that kind of, you want to build that relationship between your team so they can see the impact and, not only the negative, but the positive impact that they bring. So they feel like they want to do a good job. I mean, we could talk for hours about motivation and things like that, but it's about motivating them, making them feel part of the organisation. And then the isolation and the mental health issues will either not be as prevalent, or you'll be able to spot them sooner and get them the support that they need.
Brill, thank you. And you've not let me down, Alison. You've been great. Especially stepping in at the last minute like this has been fantastic. I know it was just an example, but brilliant. Yeah, I do have another question that's come in. Someone has asked, any tips on dealing with the occasional Monday off because of weekend partying, which might be relevant for the big bank holiday weekend we've just had, maybe?
Yes. So this one is never going to go away. It's always there. You see it in every organisation. There's always one person. The way to deal with it is to be consistent. And, so the first time it happens, you maybe let it fly, but eventually you do have to get to the point where you bring them in for that informal chat. So first stage, always informal, bring them in. We've noticed that actually you tend to have a Monday off. Not making any assumptions as to why you have a Monday off, but it's been monitored, so please don't do it. Follow it up with a letter. I guess old school terminology would be that's your verbal warning. So it's not a part of a disciplinary, but you're just reinforcing that that's not acceptable. And if it does continue, you've warned them, so then you can go through the process of inviting them to a disciplinary hearing. So you would do your investigation, basically pulling together the times, the dates of their absence, and then move through the disciplinary stages. Yes, it seems like hard work. If it's somebody that's just, in general, a good employee, but they're just chancing it on a Monday because, it's easier to not come in, hopefully the informal action will stop it. Or, in some cases, you do have to move through the first disciplinary and give them a written warning. After that, if it's persistent, then, you can move through the disciplinary and potentially terminate. The other thing to consider is that you might find out is that this person has a problem, that actually it is an alcohol addiction and therefore you have to deal with it differently. That should all come out in the informal stages, and in which case you could try and put things in place to support them through it. But generally, we do find it is just a misconduct issue, and by dealing with it firmly and consistently, so one person's not getting away with it and they're getting in trouble. But you have to feel the pain in the first instance and actually have that awkward conversation.
Yeah, it's just sort of getting it out on the table, isn't it, really?
I think sometimes people are so scared to someone described it to me as that slap on the wrist. You know, you are allowed to do that. It's you can't discipline somebody without following a formal procedure, but that doesn't mean you're not allowed to tell them what's unacceptable. You know that you are within your rights to do that.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thanks for answering that, and thanks for the person who sent in that question as well. I think that's all the questions we've got in. If anyone else does have a last minute question, do send it in. But if not, I think I will start wrapping things up. Cool. So yeah, thank you so much, Alison, for coming on today, especially, as I said, quite last minute. And obviously hoping Beth's feeling better soon. And everyone, if you'd like to join me in thanking Alison for her time and expertise in this webinar, it'd be great to hear what you found useful in the chat. So do feel free to participate there. And thank you everyone for sending in your questions, and Alison for your brilliant answers as well. Just as a sort of a final follow-up resource, I did share a link to our absence management guide. I'll just pop that in the chat again, because that's a nice little follow-up from some of the discussions we've been having today. So if anyone would like to download that, there's a little link there. And yeah, I've had a couple of comments in the chat from Katerina and from Sharon saying thank you very much for your feedback there. Yeah, and from Catherine as well, thank you very much. But yes, in the meantime, not had any more questions in. So we'll be sending you a follow-up email, including a recording of today's webinar. So hopefully that will be useful for you, and we'll see you in another webinar again soon. But in the meantime, I'll be saying goodbye, and thank you very much, Alison.
Bye.
Cheers, thank you.